Chief, let's talk about the Twitter that you wrote. And I say you wrote because it has your name on it.
Yeah.
It had your name on it. But basically, I'm talking about the tweet that was talking about the Jacob Blake
Yes.
incident that happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and not even here. And basically, you were talking about sympathy to the Blake's family. And when we read it, even I was shocked.
As well,
And there was a lot of officers upset.
I would have been mad at myself if
And
I wrote it.
before that was removed, there was not just police officers, but a lot of public were really negative on that. Can you tell us more on how that happened?
Well, I think it was a Friday night. I'm trying to remember the date. It wasn't uncommon they would write statements at a lower level, like the chief said this or that, on a commentary of non-significance, I would say. This, for whatever reason, the mayor put a tweet on. Now, I don't even know how to tweet. I don't use that. I don't look at it. I think it was around 5:15 or something. I guess the Gilbert Geier, the PIO, had sent a draft for me to look at. Now, this was a Friday. I was driving home at the time. I get home, phone gets put away for a while. I didn't see it. I didn't look at it. About 7:30 that night, my phone blows up. What the heck? What did you say? I go, what are you talking about? So I go back and I look at what was written, and it said that I was, apologized to the family, or that I wished him for a speedy recovery. I didn't even know what happened there. I had heard a little bit because Kenosha was only like 45 minutes from where I lived in the Chicago area. And I knew a little bit about that city, and I'm going, well, I not only wouldn't I not have said it, but this was like the day after. All the facts weren't in. So the next morning, Willoughby was going to do a vote of no confidence. There was some Wife's Association on Facebook that was ready to hang me. And then there was some national police organization that had my picture with the saying, hi, I'm Mike Geier, the chief of Albuquerque, and I don't have enough bad officer-involved shootings in my own city, but I got to complain or make comments about somebody else's. So as soon as I could, I did a rebuttal. I sent it to all APD, which I got chewed out for, by the way. They didn't think that was appropriate. And then I also got on that website and I wrote what really happened. And Gilbert Geiger, while he did take accountability on the media and they did pull it, he never apologized to me, not once. And that was pretty.
Is he the one that wrote it?
Yes.
So we heard a couple different things about that Gilbert Geiger said originally wrote it and gave it to Haley, which is also another PIO,
yes,
to post it, and she refused, from what I understand.
Yeah, she didn't think it was appropriate.
In her defense, I mean that.
Yeah, and it actually, when I went to the mayor's office, it was like not a big deal, and it did come from somebody outside of Gilbert. I think they told him to do it in response to the mayor, so he probably saw the mayor's and just fell in line with the tone of that. But the mayor and I are two different perspectives on that. He's looking at the touchy-feely side, and I'm looking at no self-respecting cop would make a statement like that early on. I mean, without having any facts. I mean, that's stupid. I mean, and so, but yeah, I finally, at least that website gave me thumbs up, and they said, oh yeah, we thought this was a little weird. And I actually sent them, the newscast, a little blog so they could see that he took accountability, and, all was well. But it just, that was, it's still, I think people, I mean, like I said, I would have been mad. If I saw that somebody wrote that, I would have been mad. And if I did it, I would have been mad at myself.
Is that a common thing that the city does, that they speak for you? They
on lower level stuff. I mean, the one area I had some issues with was about the stormtroopers and the feds coming in, and they, all that, when the Heinrich and the governor and everybody were jumping in on it, and faded out 2 days later. And at least I was able to go in the media. They put some statements in there that I changed 2 or 3 times, and it still came out looking like I was bashing the president. But yeah, that was the only other time. The rest of it is, the chief said, this is a program that we're doing. I mean, it was low level, but they usually wrote a lot.
But they didn't consult with you first?
Most of the other time they did. This was the only time, to his credit, this was the only time. And I guess he was rushed, or he didn't see the significance of it. Again, being a civilian, why would you? It looks like the appropriate thing for somebody in public safety or public service to say. I wouldn't say public safety.
Yeah, Chief, we posted that on our social media and the backstory, and we actually had one of the Justine or Justine.
She's the mayor's comm staff. I think she's like some kind of different title, but she runs their communications.
There's a lot of civilian positions. Nobody
Yeah,
knows what they are.
Yes.
And so she posted on her personal account on this as trying to do damage control. We tried to get comment and things like that, but she says, understanding that our own community in Albuquerque has concerns about the use of force by policy, I recommend a statement from Chief Geier to acknowledge the incident in Wisconsin and demonstrate our hardworking officers' commitment to our ongoing reform efforts. And then she says the statement was posted on social media before Chief had an opportunity to review it. When we realized the oversight, the post was removed. So what was that dynamic with Sarita and Justine and that whole Gilbert? I mean, it was a serious damage control because of the chief is supposed to be in the middle of this, not a political
Taking sides.
Taking
Right.
sides.
Well, I mean, obviously, is they pulled it. I think the mayor's one stayed on for a while because of the outcry. I mean, they saw it too. I mean, obviously, they tried to mitigate it as best they could with me, but I had sent my message out after I started getting the barrage of calls. I sent my message out, and that's just simply an all city APD all. So everybody, I didn't want anybody thinking that that was me, and it wasn't. I mean, I had retirees text me and say, please tell me you didn't say that. That doesn't sound like you at all. And it doesn't, because I would never have done that. But it was, I think that's part of their job is I don't want to say sugarcoat stuff, but there's scrubbing of information and there's different ways to present something so it doesn't look as bad as what it is. But if you're at the heart of that, it's easier to do that than when, I had to defend myself. And at best, that was a half-hearted effort on their part.
Is that a sign of how we're handling protesters? Because, that gave an indication that even before any investigation is done, that they're, going on the side of the protesters in terms of, giving them support with their cause, whatever it might be. And then in Albuquerque, and we're going to be talking about the protesters here in a little bit, we see almost that happening here with the protesters. And I don't know if that's the same nationwide. I know me and Mark were at Seattle and Portland.
Yeah.
And we saw them out of control and police not really doing much.
Well, and you just saw this in Santa Fe yesterday.
Yes.
So, I mean,
exactly.
it's, and in essence, that's probably what happened at, well, I mean, we knew they had their voice and we had to respect their voice. I mean, First Amendment rights, we couldn't do something to prevent that. And we all support the Constitution, so we have nothing wrong with that. Then you bring in the civil guards and the Second Amendment. But the potential for danger, I mean, the safety of them as well as the citizens always took a priority with us. There was always that, consideration for, whether it was Black Lives Matter or some of these groups that were there, is whatever their voice was, we weren't going to stop it. As a matter of fact, we didn't facilitate a protest, but we would run interference for them so they could march down the street without cars attacking them or, cars running them over or conflicts between citizens and them. So we made it as simple as possible. And we were there. We stood on the outskirts of most of these so that we were as quick as we could to respond. But it got to the point where in one case, it was not a protest. It was a peaceful event at Civic Plaza. And it was some black ministers and some of the faith-based groups, and they had a prayer session, and they actually had a band, and people were dancing and praying, and the mayor spoke, I spoke, and I think 4 or 5 of the ministers spoke, and very peaceful. But they had got a bad comments on their Facebook, and so they were a little worried. They asked for some extra police protection, and I've studied a lot, when this was going on about best practices and your best bet for having people out there like your bike patrol, your blue shirt uniforms, because if somebody has a heart attack or a lost kid, whatever the case, they're going to go to them. Not as a, like they're protesting the police, but that's who you go to. That's most people are there for the right reasons, then they're going to go to the police. We got to the point like Santa Fe, I asked for that night, especially knowing that the mayor and I were going to speak. And while ERT was in the basement of the main, I saw them. I did not see any. And I was mad because if something happened, like say not so much this group, but that outside entity comes and starts shooting up the crowd, I can only do so much from the stage. And by the time ERT comes, as you saw with the Onate, a lot can happen in that time. So I confronted Medina, and he went into some rhetoric about, no, that's what incites the crowd. And a friend of mine that works in Long Beach had protests there, and they said, don't do that. And I said, yeah, the guys in riot gear will incite a crowd, and you have them out of sight. So the lead into the Onate statue that was what I said that they should do, they had a peaceful protest at Tigway Park, a prayer session type thing. Just have the blue shirts around that statue and the bikes, and wave to everybody.
So what kind of decision making or role do you play on that? Are you the final word on that?
Well, you know what? This is the problem too. Is I know they said something about absentee chief, but one of the things, and I give Sarita Nair credit for me, was knowing that my wife was at risk, that gave me that where I could telecommute, and so like Zoom meetings I did at home. But those go into like even officer-involved shootings where there's a lot of officers that are exposed to people, or that RTCC where sometimes we had 30 people in there, including the mayor and Sarita. I couldn't take the chance. So what I would do is stay in my office, or I'd go at home, and I had the radio, and I had 2 phones going, and I would connect with the incident commander, and they would give me updates. Like in the case of the Onate, the protest ended. They gave me the fact that the civil guard showed up, and that was another issue. I said we had the thing with John Jones that we couldn't show that we were allies with somebody like that. So they were so afraid that they went hands off with them, where I never got a chance I never knew there were like 30 911 calls, or I would have jumped right in. But they said, they showed up, everything seems peaceful. Well, I would have said is you go up to them and say, look, we respect your First Amendment rights. This is what was made clear to Medina. And we respect your constitutional rights to bear firearms. But you know what? We don't need your help. We've got this. Why don't you guys stand here in the safety zone and just, and they would have been cooperative. They really weren't the big problem that they made people believed. They didn't do that. So what did you see happen? People went on the statue.
Let's dive into the Don Quixote shooting.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Don Quixote.
Yeah.
Don Oñate.
Don Oñate, yeah.
Yeah,
Don Quixote.
He's stuck with windmills. So aren't we all chasing windmills these days?
I keep bringing up. We'll edit Don Quixote.
You can tell he's really up with his history.
Yeah. So ABQ Raw was actually at the protest from the very beginning, before actually anyone was even there. We were the first ones there. We were our past history. 6 o'clock means 20 minutes before 6 o'clock. So, of course, we were there super early and started noticing there were some native people started showing up in their outfits, and they were doing some prayers and such. And it started out real peaceful, and we watched it progress. More and more people started showing up. The Civil Guard was actually there with their rifles and their fatigues and stuff, and we said, okay, well, they have their rights to walk around with their rifles or whatever, as long as they're not pointing it at anybody. But we obviously took notice of them, and little by little, more and more people started showing up, and
we saw that white pickup pull up underneath the mobile.
So
where it had all the tools.
Yeah, the city or APD had put up one of the tower camera things across the street, and a white pickup truck pulled up right underneath it, and in the bed of that truck was chains and pickaxes and all kinds of stuff. And we're like, okay, well, take note of that, whatever. And as things progressed, it started shifting. The focus went to they started pushing the natives away, and it started taking a different tone. And I think that's where it started going south, because the Civil Guard guys started arguing with the kids that wanted to take the thing down, and the Civil Guard they weren't gonna allow it to be taken down. But there was already tension, and at no point did we see any officers over there.
No.
Whose decision was it to not have any officer presence there whatsoever?
And that's the $60 million question, right? So we had, that was a Monday, and so we had a director's meeting, and the mayor and had told us that I think there were 3 or 4 vandalism. They had painted the statue and they put something around its neck or whatever they did. So they were concerned about it, but there was no plan that morning as far as what they were going to do. They actually, the Duke of Albuquerque statue, they kind of made a makeshift, looking like a work zone, where they put sand there in a truck and kind of, so it wasn't such an attractive target. But they didn't do anything for that one. And there was talk of whether they could. You have to, the sculptor's permission, some kind of state law. I didn't quite understand all that. But then that afternoon, when we knew there was a protest, there had been some briefings. The briefings were, I saw the action plan, which was very generic. It was just protection. But nobody ever said what are we going to do if they start going after the statue, to my knowledge. Even going into it, when I was working with Medina, who was the incident commander, I didn't get a whole lot of information from him in terms of whatever was said in between. But the Real-Time Crime Center was the hub that night, and everybody was there, including Sarita and the mayor. So what conversations were there? People were saying different things, what was said. But Medina came out later during a press conference and said that decision was, he avoided it twice when they said who gave the stand down order. And then he finally blurted out the executive team, which would have implied me. And I went bonkers on that because I had nothing to say with that. But somebody up there made that decision. And Medina made the statement is, we're not going to sacrifice property for all the trust we build in the community. So that doesn't sound like Medina's. So you can kind of fill in the blanks, but I feel there was influence from somebody outside of the police department.
Chief, when we were there, at least in my perspective, I saw a lot of. There was one incident, for example. Of course, they were trying to tear down the statue, but there was one incident that happened where one of the, I don't know if they were Antifa or what they might have been, but they actually took away a shotgun from one of the militia guys, and the militia guys had to fight to get that shotgun back. And I thought that was going to go south. But while I was there, I saw at least 5 or 6 people calling 911.
Yeah, we had 30 calls.
And they were talking about that incident with the gun. And the militia, and of course, those people were blaming everything on the militia. We didn't see really the militia doing anything. They weren't aggressive.
No.
At least I didn't get that feeling. But I was really surprised that for a long time, as it escalated to that point where there's damage to the statue, I think that thing is worth like $100,000 or something like that, which is a felony.
$1 million.
No, they're saying
Or
it was almost $1 million.
$1 million?
That entire statue.
And then, which is a felony, and then, you got violence, you got pushing, you got a lot of stuff going on. I mean, there was people getting slammed to the ground, whatever, and there were people calling and saying that, and we still didn't see no police presence until, and it's not the officer's fault, until shots were fired and someone was shot. And someone came to me because I was taking photos and said, hey, the ERT are around the corner behind the museum. And anyways, so who was the decision makers, the command, not aware of all this that was going on? Because people were calling. Otherwise, I would have probably called myself.
Well, I mean, there was we had those cameras there, and that was our feed. And I think it was our cameras that captured the pushing match with Baca and the two, no, at least one of the women. But there was, the guy was up there with the pickaxe. We saw the civil guard grabbing him. I'm sure they saw that at the Real-Time Crime Center. Whoever was in the bridge, there was a secondary room over there where the computers are. A lot of people were hanging out in that. But whoever was watching that would have possibly seen that pickup. And again, that happened really quick. And then it was, 30 seconds probably from the time that he started pepper spraying and they were chasing him to where the shots were fired. There was a delay, and they didn't react to that. And if they saw it, because we saw in the briefing and the review of it, you could see that pushing match. It was on the news, as a matter of fact. So I don't know if they got that from them. To the shooting, wasn't until the shots were fired, and it was our undercover officers that called that out. And I heard that on the radio, that they came out, and so they were all staged in there, the ERT. Well, the first team that came out was the the SWAT strike force. Okay, that's the high, rapid response, and they came out first.
Yeah, with the MRAP, with the
armored vehicle. They were that, and then the ERT came with their formations and stuff to actually protect the people that they held the civil guard in custody or in detention, took their guns, so they held that line there. So it was a two-phase response, but it wasn't until that shots fired call and that.
Another thing that we heard, maybe you can clarify for us, was after the incident of the shooting happened and the investigation took place, and they ended up filing charges against the shooter. And there's all kinds of rumors floating around that the detectives refused to charge the shooter. And even the complaint didn't seem like the shooter was at fault, almost, when you read it. What happened there with that?
That state police
and the
took it
DA
over.
eventually took it over, gave it to the state police.
Well, and the DA threw us under the bus, saying that that was not something like a passive crime scene where we could have put yellow tape around or started asking people for witnesses. So he was off base, but they were up there that night. The state police took over the investigation. One of the things is we had one of our homicide detectives, Kelsey, the last name was before Lukenkoff before, but I know she's married, probably goes by something different. One of our best homicide detectives, I must add. And she came out and she was never aware of the video of the pushing and match and what happened there with the pushing and the macing and things like that. She wasn't aware of that. But they, even our plainclothes officers reinforced that when they were yelling, they were going, "He's a cop, kill him." And that was one of the reasons they couldn't get engaged, because then they could have been outnumbered easily, and plus give up their status. So there was, it basically looked, from what I saw, I think it looked like he got hit in the face with a skateboard. He was attacked by several people before he drew the gun. I think her perspective was, based on that, she didn't see the pushing match even, that it was self-defense. And she was chastised for it, to the point where criticized, and by the DA. Well, and the DA read the complaint, and they approved it regardless. But by some of the city staff, she was chastised, and that should have been done better, and she should have watched the videos. This is a call out. You go with what you got, and you're just doing the initial complaint, and you go with that. She was so upset that she actually left the homicide unit, and she's now working at the academy.
Oh, wow.
And it was because of the way she was treated. So, and I had her brought up to my office. We bought her lunch, and we talked with her supervisors, and she did the best job she could with what she had. Somebody's getting hit in the face. Those weren't just little skateboards. They look like longboards, and he's holding something. I know some of that could have been doctored, but you're under attack by 4 or 5 people. You go down and, say they knocked him down and they found his gun. I guarantee you, somebody, like you said, they were trying to take a shotgun. He could have been shot then. So I don't know what was going through his mind, and legally I can't comment on that. I don't know how the DA perceived it, but I can speak to her defense. Is she's a good detective. She wouldn't have missed something unless it wasn't there at the time. And so, and again, this is in the first stages. Is she didn't have the luxury of waiting till the next day and having everything brought in. It was, let's do something.
But even if she looked at the pulling down of the female, that's a separate. And then you have the shooting itself. You have to look at the shooting.
It rose to a higher level.
Right, but he's still going to be justified. If he is going to be justified, he's still going to be justified regardless of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and he could have. He would have been charged for the battery or whatever happened there.
Which we are, misdemeanor battery.
Yeah, but did it rise to the level where somebody could have like you said, attacked him at that level? And it was a mob attack. It wasn't just one person pushing and shoving.
He was running away, trying to get away from them.
Yeah.
At that point where he shot, and he did get hit with a skateboard.
So it was. And that's. Again, that's for the district attorney to determine the elements of a crime, but again, as for probable cause with a criminal complaint, it's a lesser standard than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But I think is that first impression is if somebody's running away and somebody is hitting them with a makeshift weapon, that's a self-defense in my eyes.
When were you notified about the shooting that night?
Yeah, I heard it on the radio, and then I got Medina gave me a little bit of information as what was happening. then I didn't hear much of anything. And so I think there was a lot of the discussions that went on for probably hours through the night before the final call was made. But you got to remember, there was a lot of people up there, you know.
So the officers that responded after the shooting, the ERT and the SWAT handled everything good, right,
Yeah.
perfect.
They had a riot
In fact, when the SWAT team, we were right there, all three of us. When the SWAT team showed up, the Antifa, whoever
Yeah.
they were telling the SWAT teams the militia guys did it, shot him.
Yeah.
So in their mind, SWAT team thought, the militia shot the guy. So it was very confusing. And now you have the mob turning on the police officers. They were having a hard time controlling them, and it's not like your typical normal crime scene.
Well, and that's what I mean, and you probably saw more than I did, but it sounded like the Civil Guard performed a protection
did.
raid around them.
They absolutely did.
They came and they
In fact, one of them was the first to do first aid.
Yeah.
first aid,
Yeah,
and then
first
they kept the mob from lynching the shooter.
Yeah.
And they took control of the gun so that it didn't get disturbed.
And I heard also that, that the MRAP was there, and that's where they loaded up all the militia's weapons. And then that group was pushing forward. I know I saw the one instigator or activist, whatever his position was, encouraging the crowd to push forward before they did the smoke and then the whatever. But the biggest fear was you got all these guys handcuffed, their safety of the prisoners, and then the weapons that are there.
Oh yeah.
Is they had to hold that line at that point. And so the crowd wasn't friendly at that point, and it was I think one of you guys just mentioned a riot. It was I think they flattened the tires on the
They
vehicles.
did.
And
We
stuff.
watched that
Yeah,
happen.
so I mean it was they weren't there with good intent at all, and I don't think the group that took over from the peaceful, and that was always the setup, is it was always a peaceful, and then the secondary group would come in.
And we've been all over the country and witnessed firsthand how it seems to be like a little game where it starts out as a peaceful event where people do speeches and say, we need change and things need to change and we're going to do change, and then bad people start infiltrating into the group, and then it turns into something totally different than what it started out as. And it's all planned because Portland, for example, every single night for 100 days they did the same thing. The speeches were always the same. I mean, I got bored with it. I told them I'm going to show up later when the riots actually happen. I don't want to see the same speeches over. And we kind of joked about that. But anyway, so it's the same speeches, and then the crazy people start showing up and just start antagonizing the crowd, and they join in. And next thing you know, it's an attack that they know it's going to happen every single night, and it's happening all over the country.
I get a lot of people asking me, why are we blocking the streets and letting them, do that, and blocking the streets and even not even being close to there, so they feel empowered. So how come we allow them to do that? That was one of the questions.
Whose decision is that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of in some ways it is part of a good practice now, because because people get run over in the crowds. And I remember when the big ones we had during that with the Occupy. I remember Occupy Albuquerque. There were fights, and I mean they blocked the street, and and so without us blocking with them in, people were almost running them over. There were fist fights and things like that. Plus, when they go mobile, is you got the freeway up there. A lot of times they were walking down Central. Is we want to kind of minimize not just the risk to them, but to the other public, because it's you walking into a situation like that is it's a big crowd to be that one person. If you remember, where somebody would actually pull somebody out of cars and things like that. I mean, we didn't want that. So it also was the intent with constitutional policing is it's their First Amendment right. So we have to let them do it, but it's better if we control the situation, because they easily could go off different tangents down side streets. They might target somebody's house, especially with some of these groups, is you just don't know what they're doing. So what it gives us that control is we kind of lead them and guide them. It's not a facilitation so much as just a protection move. And again, it's probably kept a lot of those, there were 30 some events, only 3 really that went south. Probably because we did that, we prevented that. Because you also have other groups that a couple of these were competing groups at the same protest, and especially in the stable ones or the static ones like at Civic Plaza, you saw that you had two opposing groups. So we had to be there and basically draw a line between them so that they don't kill each other.
So,
Go ahead.
yeah. So before we go a little bit off on this, I have a question about Onate. You know, you herald your detective being the best of the best. What happened to that where it got overtaken by state police? You know, there's always that rumor that the governor sent it down, and you know the other forces, AG and all that. The one question is you know, why can't a police force just do what they're allowed to do, investigate, and because we have the best of the best? And two, why did this get taken over, and you know, by who?
Well, the state police was asked to take it over because I think part of the reason is there was pretty much an immediate notice from some lawyers that there was going to be a lawsuit. So our city legal was brought in from the start. I think that the question of were our actions appropriate? Did we take enough control of this? Whereas there, like is being implied here, was there influence from perhaps the mayor or Sarita or any of those other entities that were up there? The state was the one that was going to be that neutral, ombudsman type of investigator. They were going to do it without any personal involvement. They actually weren't part of they helped us in other protests where they helped us control things, but they were viewed as we can't basically look at what we did and do an honest job. And especially after Raul's tirade about we blew the crime scene, we didn't get witnesses, they just wanted to make sure that we didn't get thrown under the bus any further.
Do you guys think you did a good enough job defending APD in that to say, look, we did what we could do? State police took over because of political influence, not because we did a crappy job.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track with that. I mean, it was obviously some things could have been prevented if we had the uniformed officers out there. I think he's just standing there. You have no cops at all. It's like kids in a toy store. They're going to grab something and play with it or run with it or whatever if there's nobody around to stop them. And I think that, but once it went south, we did a good job. I think that the ERT teams were, on spot, doing the right thing. I think the calls at the scene in terms of controlling that. I mean, it could have been terrible if they grabbed 6-7 firearms from the car or from the vehicle. It would have been fatalities. There's no doubt about it. So I think that, you're right. I think, could we have done it better? I think that that detective got a raw deal, and I feel bad for her. And I think the city, the cops, we lost a good cop in investigations, and homicide being a crucial part of our department. I think just that image of that, somebody didn't have her back kind of replays to the rest of the officers is if we do something wrong or it appears to be wrong, are we going to protect our own? And it's not a matter of covering up, but I mean, if she was right and with limited information made the right decision, then leave it at that. Don't chastise her and make it worse. Just let it go with that. We didn't have all the information. This is what we had at the time. And that's exactly what she did. And it wasn't any cover-up on her part.
So let's talk about PIO Gallegos a little bit here. As far as you know, does he have any police experience? Should he be talking on behalf of the department? Because I know we had a PIO, Simon Drobick. I mean, we all know Simon Drobick, and he had been the PIO under the last administration, and it seemed like he had the public actually liked listening to him at press conferences and doing statements in crime scenes. He was good at it. Do you think a police officer would be a better PIO than a political appointee, or what do you think what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think for the Johnny on the spot on scene and those kind of reportings that, of a recent, whether it's an officer involved shooting or a bad accident, somebody like Simon, I mean, I know they saw him as probably a little too colorful. He would make statements like those knuckleheads over there and things. But I mean, he spoke from his heart. I mean, he spoke as a true police officer. I think that really spoke volumes to just that off the cuff, this is what happened, and not let's think this out and script it, what we're going to write and whatever. It's Simon just, and he hit it right on the head each time. They didn't, that was not part of this administration. They wanted to go through a little more careful release. And Simon probably got us in trouble here or there with things, but nothing that wasn't, dramatic that caused us any major issues. And I think that once they started pulling Simon, Gilbert doesn't have any. I think he worked for the governor's office in some capacity before under Richardson. That's probably mine. They did basically had, the statements. Simon didn't make statements for the police. He never said, the chief says this, or a press release was never written by Simon. We got into that with Gilbert as he was communication director, so he did that. And then the social media aspect and all the things that Haley that came under him became a different PIO than the John Walsh of years ago, or some of the other ones we've had up there. And I think that once you change that, it changed the dynamic of it's to me it's a little less credible. I mean, even as a lieutenant or sergeant, if nobody's around, they come to you and, hey, what happened here? Well, we had a bad accident, and, whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. You're okay. You said something wrong. It's not a big deal, but we didn't cause issues by having PIOs that were officers because they had the police perspective. They were cops. So you hit it on the head a little bit. Is that we get away from that when we get, more of a neutral perspective.
Yeah, I was gonna say most departments their PIOs are all police officers. Yeah. Very rare do you see a civilian. I don't know. All the major departments their PIOs are police officers. The reason they do that is because when they're asking questions and they want to talk about why a police officer did something, they know because they understand.
They know policy,
procedure and policy, and also they don't come with a political agenda. They just talk about the facts of the case. But whenever you get a civilian, and the sense that I get with Gil is that he pushes the mayor's narrative. Do you think?
Well, I mean, it is definitely not a police narrative. It's something that goes in a different direction, because I mean, it's the police one is it's a little unpolished. I mean, and even for me, I should have been. Most police chiefs are able to get in front of things and say things. Mm-hmm. You guys remember Stover? I mean, he made no qualms about saying things.
He didn't need a PIO.
No,
he wasn't a PIO.
But it was, I mean, sometimes you need that. I mean, the chief in Houston goes there and speaks for himself. I've hardly ever seen a press conference where he's not leading that.
Yeah, Grady Judd down there. I'm not sure where he's from. The sheriff. There are those sheriffs and chiefs that they are the PIO.
Yeah, and that changed, okay, because we weren't able to get out. Now, sometimes I don't want to be in that position because without having all the facts, I'm going to get bombarded, and you're afraid to release too much or that you release the wrong thing is where, well, here's the gun that was used, and you hold that up, and it turns out it wasn't that gun, and, you end up, eating your own words later. So you got to be careful what you release up front. And it's just a process of you give as little as possible because you don't know, and there's no reason to jump to conclusions on base what you heard until all the facts are in. Then you give a little bit more, and then once you have all the interviews done and you got more basis, then we can do, and I promise that transparency of ourselves is every officer involved shooting, the media waited for us patiently rather than jump at throats and do IPRA because they knew we were going to do a PowerPoint. We knew we were going to explain it. We were going to include the videos, body cameras, 911, walk them through the scene with pictures and explain policy and what went through and tell who the officers were, a little bit about the offender. We gave them everything they would ask in questions. Toward the end, they didn't even ask a lot of questions. And then we put the link out so they could get all the videos and verify it themselves. They didn't even have to IPRA it. And from the first one we had in January of 2018 to, they just had one today or yesterday. The last one that I did that's how we were doing it. And it worked great because that's the transparency. We didn't hide anything. Now, granted, we didn't, when you do them, there's only so much you can put in a half hour. So, we didn't put the whole from the start to the finish like on an officer's chase. We'd get to the point where the force was used or shots were fired. But, I mean, they had the opportunity to go back. And never once did I ever see anybody go back and pull some out and say, hey, you missed this or you didn't tell us this. Because the critical parts were there. And that's, when the media does these, they're short 90 seconds, stories, maybe, a minute and a half, 3 minutes in the worst ones. That's all they want. They don't want, the whole book version, from, War and Peace type version. Give us the facts. Give us something that they can see. They take pictures of that. They put it on their. They do the video. They replay a lot of that. That's working with the media as well. And so it's something that we never did before. We got in front of it and we did our own, and we sometimes didn't do a very good job. And then we got down the road, it turned out the facts we gave too early were wrong, and then you got to correct yourself. And I think poor Gordon Eden got in that statement when he made the statement as Garner versus Tennessee on the Boyd shooting, and how he's probably regrets that. And
when he said it's justifiable.
Yeah. So I mean, but you see how that's why you got to be real careful as a chief. As you may get caught off and speak off the cuff, and then you realize you just put your foot in your mouth. And so, but you're right. I mean, I think a police officer has more credibility.
Let me ask you this. Kind of getting to the end of this. When, in your opinion, do you feel like you were fired as the chief of police, or was it a resignation, and why?
Well, I mean, it was. After the meeting with the mayor, I had a meeting with Sarita, and they made it pretty clear that they had some issues. None of which were ever told to me before that. I know that there were meetings with Medina apparently that had happened. When I left Sarita on Labor Day, the thing was I was supposed to, come up with an answer, or they would come up with an answer the next day. So I met Tuesday morning, went to the office, and basically said, "What are you going to do?" Well, the writing was on the wall. Okay, I knew that if I said, I had asked if I could stick around to the end of the year because we had made some new initiatives. I thought maybe we could turn that violent crime down and at least leave on a high note. There were a couple other projects I wanted to make sure they were in the right hands. And he wouldn't even give me that. And the reason I know that is, if you remember the discussion with Sarita, that's why she resisted so much. They already knew they had Medina was going to be the interim chief. He was telling me that for 2-3 weeks before. So I said, okay, I'll retire. And then I went along with, I did. I mean, I had the kids, wanted me home, and my dad had retired and only to die 9 months later and never to be able to fulfill his dream. I knew I had an expiration date. Did I know when? No. I mean, nobody does unless you plan your retirement, like some people with the calendar, and they're Xing off to the minute that they're going to leave the department. I didn't know that. My goal was to stay at least till the end of his term and help if there was, but I wasn't going to go much farther than that. I knew that, but he wouldn't let me do that. He said, no, it's got to be now. So, I mean, it was pretty obviously if I didn't, it was going to be this big chief was dumped or whatever. And I didn't want my family or anybody to perceive it that way because they all know how hard I worked. So I agreed to retire. But when I walked off that podium that day, and I mean, it was pretty emotional for me. And I walked off, and I didn't see what Keller said, but he jumped on the podium. He already had, we're going to do this. Now that he's gone, we're going to do this. And he got a little bit attacked by the media. Afterwards, right away, he had a meeting with the 4 deputy chiefs. Right away, Medina was the interim the same day. And then for the next 2 weeks, no one talked to me up there. Okay, so I knew that this was planned. You saw the recent thing with the 5 deputy chiefs, all which it's all rebuttable. I'll basically, it was written by Gilbert or somebody else, but it's that's what's going on.
What was their motivation of writing that letter where they spoke not very nice of you?
No, I don't think they wrote it. That was contrived. I think Medina was behind that because he was talking about how they were all unified now. Well, he also was talking about fear tactics, and he's a known bully, and so I think. Some of those guys are my friends up there, and and I think that they were worried about their job. And somebody said, "We're going to write this." It had leaked out that I had an op-ed, so they wanted to jump. They already got beat up in the paper pretty bad, so they jumped out with that. And I'm thinking, is that the best you can do? 3 of those people weren't there for some of the things you claimed that they saw. Mm-hmm. The last one just started 3 weeks ago. I wasn't there when he started. They just told these people, "Here's the letter, sign off." Now. Does that go to their character? I don't know. I mean, I understand that the families and stuff, you're gonna bite the bullet here and there, but the motivation didn't come from them, and I bet you some of them feeling a little bit awkward about if they see me another time in the future that there may be a story I hear that I'm not hearing right now. But I can guarantee you, none of them came up with that on their own.
In retrospect. Do you wish you had handled the press conference a little differently? Do you wish you had just gone off into the sunset differently and let them fire you, or do you stick to your guns and say that retiring was the way to go?
Well, obviously I was worried about the difference between firing and then being able to use like your terminal time and things like that. I didn't really know what I would lose out on. And again, I took that in consideration. But, at the time I was okay with, I didn't want to make a big fuss. It was like at this point it was wife fight City Hall, for lack of a better word. But it wasn't until it sank in a couple of days later and I realized how underhanded that whole thing was for just political reasons, because that plan was made basically as a political strategy to say, hey, yeah, we're failing a little bit, but part of that's on this chief that's leaving, and now we've got a new chief and we got some new plans. We're going to move forward, and we're going to make the difference. And the reason I know that is because when I asked, I said, we're turning this tide a little bit. I said, we finally, I was going to move Medina. We had the plans. We were going to change this. And I said, just can I stay to the end of the year? And he said, no, it's too late. He says, nothing's going to change anyway. Well, sure, because you already had the plan. The body wasn't even cold, and he's telling what they're going to do. It was a strategy that go into next year as an election.
When you say you were going to move Medina, I mean, what were you going to move? I mean, could you demote him, or were you just going to move him into a different, instead of being in charge of the field officers, just put him in charge of somebody else?
Yeah, the first one, when I first was going to do it, I actually talked to J.J. Garego, and I said, would you be willing to take the field? And he's in like records, and he's got the RTCC, and he wanted no part of the field. I mean, right now that's not as attractive a job. So then I was going to switch him and Smathers, because then Harold would have gone into the special ops. That's where I would have put him. I contemplated IA case. There was a lot of things. I mean, there was a little frustration on my part because he was insubordinate. He wasn't listening to me. He wasn't following, and he just kind of, when I told him I was going to move him the first time, normally he would have got all upset. He just said, okay, which tells me he already knew. He knew that I was a lame duck at that point. So yeah, that's what he was going to. I was moving because that would have taken him away from the violent crime initiative, which I feel he was failing on.
And one final question for me.
Sure.
Chief, the Medina, the mayor's already on record saying he's going to do a national search for a chief, and as we all know, there's only 1 year left in the term. Do you think the plan is to keep Medina as the permanent chief, or do you think they're actually going to do some kind of search and find somebody that's going to stick around for a year?
Yeah, they opened the national search. They are going to do that. There is a process. There was an article also by Dave Cooley in the paper, a letter he wrote, was like, why would anybody want to come here? It is the last year. If this mayor doesn't stay, would you uproot yourself from, say, the East Coast in the midst of COVID, in the midst of going to a department with a consent decree, with high crime, where the last chief just got kind of hustled out the door, no guarantees at all. Across the nation, chiefs are getting let go. 18 or so major city chiefs have been let go or resigned on their own because of all these problems. There's not a lot of stability, and a lot of people don't want to be a chief, nor would they take that job. So that if they do this national searches, the quality of the candidates are going to be slim. I know Medina's put in. He actually put in for chief when Eden, got it. So he actually thought back then that he was qualified. He's failed a couple times to be chief elsewhere. He was so dedicated to this cause that he actually, loyalty to me or friendship, he, gave up for his own purposes. I think that all the rhetoric that came out recently about his checkered past with the shootings and with the resistance possibly from ABQ forward, where Mr. Ellis is, the father of the young man that was killed, knowing that Harold's deposition made it clear that, he didn't take control of that. I think that it'd be real hard to go to the public with that. I know there's groups like Martin Luther King Group that say that would be like 20 steps back. It would be a bad optics for the city to make him permanent. But stranger things have happened, and like I said, is absent anybody else qualified locally or, in the state of New Mexico, which who's going to come here that lives in New Mexico right now? The odds are that they'll do a search, but he may end up on top.
Have you heard a list of names come forward that have applied for the position?
He did. They just started it, and most likely I'm not going to hear that.
They keep it secret usually.
Yeah, that'll be secret, and they'll have a committee that will review the applications and narrow it down to maybe a final 4, and then they'll make a decision. And the mayor will obviously have to approve from that final 4. So I know I saw Pete Cassettis the other day.
The former chief of police of state police.
Yeah, and he wants no part of it, and Manny doesn't want any part of it. He's possibly running for mayor. So other than that, I don't see any other, from Santa Fe or Las Cruces or Farmington wanting any interest.
Not many people are jumping.
I don't think so. I mean, it really would be a high risk. And again, as the tenure for chiefs now is around 3 years. I came close, but no cigar, right? But it is not an attractive job nationwide. It's not just here. This is a bad time to be in that position, because you become that focal point is when everything goes wrong. Is politicians are going to find you as that, and me being older and have my time in, it was easier to sacrifice me is because, well, it's not a big loss in their mind that you're going to get a pension and be well off, but it hurts. Is the fact is that you put your whole career in and devoted your whole life to this, and it becomes who you are, and you define yourself that way. To be treated with that lack of respect by somebody that's not a cop and doesn't understand what that means, the sacrifices that our officers make, the missed birthday parties and holidays and the hours we work and some of the gruff and crap we have to put up with. It's easy to just dismiss that as a chess game is, well, I lost my rook so I can move my pawn. That's didn't go over very well with me. That's why after about 3 days, I just lost 3 nights of sleep. I said, I'm not going to sit down without standing up for what I believe is right.
If you were mayor, who would you pick as chief? Who's a good chief?
Well, internally, nobody. I mean, I think some of them are ready to retire. Some aren't the right personality or the right person for the job. I definitely don't think the outsider that we have would be good. He doesn't have that kind of insight in Albuquerque. I think that if we did a national search, I mean, I've been part of the National Academy Association after going to the NA. There are people out there that, I saw that had integrity, and you get to meet during a 10-week stay with these people. There's some good people out there. If we really got somebody that really wanted to make a difference here, there's probably I looked at Carmen Bez from Seattle. When she left, I was trying to get her to be a deputy chief here because she would have been a good successor.
Yes.
And I thought that, and again, it would have fallen into the whole, having that, that type of chief, a woman chief, a female, a black American chief. I think knowing her from the major city chiefs, I mean, she was a smart lady. She was had the lady of integrity, and she knew what she was doing. And she left because the council would fund the police 100. She knew that there was nothing more she could do.
Yeah.
That's the kind of person that I would bring here, is somebody that gave up that for the right reasons, rather than somebody that wanted to be a chief and stopped at no ends to do it, or wanted a bigger salary. It's not about the money. It's about, I live here, my family lives here, I devoted to APD and to making the city safe. And when you go beyond that, I really doubt that you're really trying to do what needs to be done.
Chief, just my last question.
Sure.
Officers have it really hard. When I was active police, it was fun times.
It was a different job.
It was a different job. Yeah. Nowadays, it's very difficult. I don't think I could do the job now, the way things are. In terms of the DOJ, the attitude of just the atmosphere.
You're going to get in trouble for anything you do.
But
right.
What message do you have for the officers? What can you say to the officers that are there, that can't leave because, they're committed to the department, the community? Do you have a message for them?
The Francos, the civilians, the guys that are still have 13 years.
The rank and file.
Well, first thing I would say is don't give up hope. And from my standpoint, again, being second generation, I grew up in a cop family, and back in the days of the war stories and the camaraderie. With this new generation, it's not quite the same. So it's real hard to relate to some of the younger generation, the millennials. But I think they're all here for the right reason. And if they can just focus on what they said when they applied, they want to help people make a difference. When I was a young sergeant in Chicago, there was I was at what's now the School of Staff and Command, but back then it was a really rough selection, and it was a 9-month at Northwestern University, very prestigious. Officers from all over the world came. And at our graduation, there was a deputy superintendent from Chicago sitting next to me. And we were talking, we're at a table with other people from the class and other brass. And he looked at my name tag and said, Geier, he said, is Euro Man on the job? And I go, yeah. And to this day, I regret these words. I said, but you probably wouldn't know him. He's just a cop in that time in Winnetka. And he jumped my, I won't say what, but embarrassed the heck out of me saying, don't you? He goes, Euro Man was doing stuff when you were a kid. How do you think you're here in that position now if it wasn't for him? He's not just a cop. He's the one that got you there. Don't ever forget where you came from. And I didn't. I mean, I always thought that you remember your roots in policing. Those were the best days in my career. I never aspired to be a chief. I loved being a cop. So I never forgot that. So that's why even with Franco's and defending this excessive discipline and fighting the federal monitor and even the DOJ came second nature to me, is because they are always first in my heart. And I think that if they can just believe in themselves and withstand this storm, whether it's from the leadership or from the CASA or from COVID and all the stuff that they've gone through, they'll come out better for it. And if they stand their ground and do their job, do it with integrity, do it right, don't give up hope, still be proactive, serve that community well, is that you can stand with your head up proud at the end. And regardless of what happens in the whirlwind and the perfect storm that's going around them, is always forget that that's what made our profession noble, and that's what makes you who you are, because every day you get a chance to help people, and not many professions do that. And you can go that at the end of your career and know that you've made a difference. And that's what they're striving for. And if we can just convince them is don't give up, because, there's a little bit of heat going on right now. There's a little bit of, concern with having a consent decree and having these monitors here, but they still can be their own cop. They can still have fun in the job. I don't mean fun and games. I mean, you can still enjoy what you're doing, and you can still laugh, over funny stuff that we see. It's our job is, so many years of basically there's some comedy in there as well. If not, we wouldn't be able to survive with what we see every day and what they see. You have to have that release. Just do that. Work with each other, support each other, and I think they'll get through. And that's the best message. I'm not there to, provide the protection or the guidance that I always tried to do for them. Every officer involved shooting I know was accused of not going to them. I'd call the officers individually 2 or 3 days later and talk to them. And rookie officers would be surprised that the chief would take that time, but at least 2 officers told me about issues they were having when I asked. And that takes a lot of guts on their part. And I was able to get them some help so that they didn't go back before they were ready. And that's what you don't get by going to the scene and shaking their hand while they're in the backseat of the car with the union before they can make a statement. I always took that extra ground. And again, with discipline is they characterize me, Ginger, as the grandfather that gave the wisdom to the young boy sitting on his lap and, don't do this again. But not anybody that I gave a major break to ever came back and did anything wrong. So what does that tell you is that they not only did it for the right reasons, but I think a lot of them did it because they didn't want to disappoint me. And when I saw them do something good, I'd write a little note on an email or whatever. Hey, that was a great arrest last night. You did me proud. I think that sticks with them. And that's what the leadership that's lacking, I think, right now, is when it's coming this way. My job is I'm a servant. I serve you. You don't work for me. I work for you. And I think that they got to see that as be their own person, and they'll do great. I think I couldn't be more proud of the officers in this department. What they've gone through since January of 2020 to now, it's unprecedented, and they should all get medals of valor for what they've seen and what they've done with COVID and everything else, protests, hours that they worked, even now being short-staffed and constant overtime and the stress of the job. It's going to wear them down. And one of the projects that I didn't get to finish was an emotional health and wellness program to look out, because we've had more officer suicides in the nation now, almost double what officer-involved killings or in the line of duty deaths. And that tells you is this job is going to kill you if you don't get help and get peer support or whatever. And if they're not getting that from the top down, we're going to lose some. I had a number of officers, unprecedented amount of positive drug tests. And I think a lot of that had to do with the stress of the job. And you know what? There's no option once you get to that point. If if they could have got help before, or in one case, the officer had a drinking problem. He ended up serious domestic where he hurt his wife and then he went to jail. If we could get to those officers before, think how many we can save. And so if some discipline isn't meet Dr. Ginger's standards, who sits 2,000 miles away, treats these officers like numbers, doesn't care, he has no insight in their family or whatever, how that may impact the partners that are short when that officer has to be on suspension for 2 months, the impact that has on the department, I don't care. I'll stand up to that. Just like what that deputy chief said to me, don't ever forget where you came from. And I hope that the leadership in our department doesn't do that.
Well, Chief, I want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts to join us for at least a couple hours here.
Yeah, I missed dinner, I guess. You have to explain that. Please call my wife on the way home. So,
but
we can send a note.
Yeah.
I mean, final words. I mean, anything you want to say to the citizens of Albuquerque, to anyone else? I mean, in closing, what do you?
Well, I think to the citizens, I mean, things are changing. I mean, it's we're going to get through COVID. The city is, yes, there's violent crime, but it's isolated to groups of people that are involved in violent crimes. And one day you're a victim, the next day you're an offender. If most neighborhoods are safe, I mean, we have high property crimes because of these people that go out and prey on that. But, at some point, if once we tackle the hardest areas, this will be a city that people will come to. And as long as we get economic development again following this, this could be a haven. I mean, this is a great climate, great scenery. There's so many good things that are in Albuquerque, is they shouldn't give up and leave the city just because of this. I think is if we all stick together as one big Albuquerque, like the mayor, envisions, I think we'll survive this. We'll push out the bad guys, and we'll push out the evil and whatever else causes the concerns for people's safety and quality of life. It'll happen. It's just a matter we have to work together. Everybody can't be the silent majority. You have to engage. It takes a whole village, and that's what I would recommend: is get involved, help your police officers, support these other programs, and I think we'll get through this.
There is hope.
There is hope. You never give up hope.
Well, good luck in your retirement or whatever other choice you decide to make going forward. We'll be watching you and hoping for nothing but the best.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. It's nice. Chief. I mean, I'm not trying to be bitter or vindictive. This is kind of cathartic for me, is to kind of leave on a high note that hopefully I didn't leave things in a bad place, and hopefully that things will get better.
Awesome.
So thanks, guys.
Good night, guys.